Hi, this is Virgil from Virgil Tyler Ertley Studios, Sculpture Studios and Pottery Studios. Today I'm going to show you real quick how to reclaim your clay. It's a good way to save yourself some money and to learn how to best manage your materials. What I've done already is I've broken up the clay. I have some of these old buckets or old tubs that I got from an old restaurant. And I've broken up my clay into small pieces, maybe about an inch by inch, or whatever you want to say. It's just small chunks. It's best to keep them small and uniform so that they evenly take up the water. And breaking your clay up into powder isn't really the best idea, because then the water has a hard time penetrating down into the clay. So keep it. You're always gonna get some dust. And it's always, small particles are always going to be down at the bottom. But go ahead and break up your clay into small pieces, and then what you're going to do is pour the water in. Make sure the clay is covered. Let it sit. After probably 1 day or so, even less, the clay will have soaked in all the water and gone from being still kind of chunks to having soaked up all of the water evenly, and is now a nice mush. But the problem is the mush is almost impossible to use. It's not the right consistency, and so you have to dry it. And so what I've done is I've created for myself a couple of tables with some plaster drying tables, where I take this clay and I put it on the table and let it dry. And once you let it dry for a day or two, depending on your environment that you're living in, and the airflow, it can dry quickly or dry slower. But once that's done, you're going to wedge your clay. And if you're doing it for sculpture, it's not as crucial that the clay is wedged really thoroughly. But for pottery, you're going to want to make sure it's wedged thoroughly. And as you wedge it, you're going to find, chunks and things in your clay and inconsistencies in the actual consistency of the clay that you need to take out, so that as you're throwing a pot, you don't run into a chunk or run into a section of the pot that's a lot harder, and it will impede your ability to actually throw the pot. So once you're wedging, make sure you wedge that clay for the pottery really well when you're reclaiming your clay. Sculpture, again, it's not that crucial. I'm going to kind of show you my table right now. So here's my table. What I did to create the plaster table was to just on the floor I put down a plastic bag, something to separate it from the floor so you don't stick it to your floor, because that's not a good idea. That would be very sad for you. I put down some plastic, just built myself a quick little 2x4 frame, or any frame out of wood, and I've actually put some burlap. I created some burlap strengtheners inside of it, just ran the length of it, and then poured the plaster over the top of those. And once that dries, it's very useful for wedging your clay. Some people put canvas or some type of material over this, which I've done in the past, and it's fine, whatever works for you. But what I've done is, once that clay soaks up the water, you take that clay and you place it on your table, and not too thick. Try to keep the edges clean so that it doesn't dry in a way where one part is drying more. The edges will always dry out a little bit more because they're exposed to more of the air, and they're also, the water is being sucked out from the table. But just try to keep it smooth, and keep it a uniform thickness. And once that clay gets to a certain point, which this clay gets to a certain hardness, you can take that and re-wedge it. And again, like I mentioned before, wedging for pottery and wedging for sculpture are two different things. Pottery being a little bit more exacting, want to keep it a little bit more uniform. Sculpture, not as much. So just take it. Once it's dried out, you can see this clay is still a little bit wet. But once it starts to dry, that's why I like to, I'll scrape the clay off a little bit to get some of that wet stuff off and expose the plaster again. Continue sucking up the water. And I'm not going to bore you by having a video of me wedging for 20 or 30 minutes. But once this wedging is complete, your clay is ready to use. And I've used this to reclaim a lot of my sculpture clay. I don't have the money to keep buying clay. And this clay, some of these clays that I've had for 5 or 6 years now. And you'll have some of your favorites as far as sculpture goes. And you'll want to keep them, so you can always reclaim them. So once my clay is wedged and it's to the consistency I like it, what I'll do is go ahead and grab some type of cloth and I'll wet it. Not too wet, because this clay will soak up any moisture that is in the cloth, just kind of damp. You wrap it up. You can place this within a bag and for later use, and then it should always be ready for you to use. And that's a great way to save yourself some money. Now remember that clays are not all the same. Your pottery clay and your sculpture clay could be the same, or it could be different. And depending on how you're firing your pottery, if you're mixing in some of these lower fire clays, if you're doing high fire, it's not going to be compatible, and your clay bodies will probably do funny things. So don't be. You do need to have some. Take some precautions not to mix your clays too much, and just be smart about it. So that's just a real quick rundown on how to reclaim your clay and save yourself some time and money. And I think that's it.